welcome everybody to this hopefully very fun and absorbing conversation with Zia Akhtar Abbas, the CEO of TCF, and Nadeem Hussain, one of its more stellar graduates and alums. Zia Saab, Nadeem Saab, welcome.
Thank you so much, Umair. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Zia, आपके यहाँ तो अभी थोड़ी रात हो गई है. We apologize. Nadeem and I are basking in the sunny California weather, but hopefully it'll be all worth it. And thank you so much for taking time out at 10 p.m. in Karachi.
Truly my privilege.
Challenge. Good. So I think we'll start. I mean, first of all, obviously, just very, very quick intro. So Zia Akhtar Abbas, mashallah, storied career as a banker and financier, RBS and Citibank for many years, Standard Chartered Bank, and now has, joined to helm TCF. And Nadeem, PhD, mashallah, University of Massachusetts, and we'll talk about his work and all. A TCF graduate who's now sitting here near where I am, here in Silicon Valley. So I think a quick introduction to TCF itself would be really nice. So Eric, first of all, thank you for arranging this and arranging and curating the discussion we're about to have. I know you have a video that explains a little bit about the Citizens Foundation for our audience. Maybe if we can play that first, then we'll get to the conversation.
This is about 94, 95. We had two options for us. One was either to actually be part of a solution or be part of the problem. So fortunately, alhamdulillah, we decided that we don't want to be part of the problem.
Somebody amongst us, came up with the idea. Probably education is the root cause of a lot of ills in any society.
We are a bunch of ordinary people who come from entrepreneurial background. So we set about an entrepreneurial solution to what we thought was a major problem, which is education for young children.
We said the organization we will build will be inclusive, so people can belong to this.
We said that it would be a national organization. We said it would be a co-educational system. There will be only female faculty, because when we researched around, there was a lot of insecurity with parents to send their daughters.
If we find a child, we feel it's our duty to educate that child, irrespective of their belief or social background or religion.
The most important thing was that we would take the schooling system to the villages and to the slums.
Wow. So yes, let's get into our conversation, right? So we all have some idea of where Pakistan stands globally on education and women's equality, right? And it's not a place, especially on the education side, where we would want to be. In your view, right, why does this education gap or shortfall persist? And what are some realities that folks like us may not know about?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So first of all, I mean, really, what is the scale of the problem? I think we don't realize that. I think we are as close to ground zero for the global learning crisis as could be imagined. The World Bank has a term called learning poverty, which basically essentially means that for a child of school-going age, if they are out of school or if they're in school but unable to learn at the level at which they are in terms of age and grade, they are learning poor. So out of 10 school, so roughly basically 71 million kids in Pakistan are of school-going age, and that size itself, bigger than many countries. Out of that population, if you were to just line up 10 kids of school-going age, 4 would be out of school. And that is a number, the 25, 26 million number of out-of-school children we hear a lot. But then there is another crisis, which is of the remaining 6, 3 would be in school, but not really learning how to read, not really learning how to do basic math. And that together, a 70% learning poverty, it kind of is an existential question, not just in a learning or education sense, but as a national kind of problem, because it impacts it has knock-on effects on every single other crisis that we are facing. Now, there are some things which this crisis is not. So it's not a demand issue. Many people, and especially the narrative around Pakistan and around it being a Muslim country and girls' education, many people feel that this is really a case of people not wanting to send their kids or especially their girls to school. So almost 10 years ago, Pew Research Center did a study in Pakistan and found that 86% of people felt that both girls and boys, it was equally important for girls and boys to go to school. In fact, 5%, other than that, 86% felt that it was more important for girls to go to school. So it's really not attitudes. And we see that in our experience where mothers line up outside of our schools. There's always waiting lists if there is a population of girls and boys to get into school. The out-of-school children problem is also often misunderstood. So the bulk of them, more than 70% of those out-of-school children are above the age of 10. So it's really an adolescent problem. And it is not a surprise that it is an adolescent problem because, for instance, if you just take the last 2 years of that, age band, which is 5 to 16 years of age, which is called intermediate in Pakistan, grade 11 and 12. So there are roughly 9,000 institutions in Pakistan, public or private, imparting higher secondary education for those 2 years. And compare that to primary schools, which is 126,000 primary schools in Pakistan. So there's a complete lopsided supply chain. And even if there was a value proposition for secondary and higher secondary education, which there is not, even then there wouldn't be the absolute number of institutions required for a population of this size. So why does that exist? It exists because of two fundamental things. There is a lack of intent. I think we can't escape the fact that, this is a solvable problem. Most countries in the world at least have solved for access. So if we haven't solved for access, there is an intent and some level of abdication, which is a gap. And the second thing is then capability. So, if we were to understand capability and how governance fails the education system, one great proof point which is published by the Education Statistics and the government itself is, let's say Punjab, which is half of the 71 million kids in Pakistan of school-going age. The education secretary in Punjab changes every 4 months.
Okay.
So we wouldn't change, anyone in our business or anyone working for us that frequently. And this is someone who has to manage, 35 million kids and their education. So there are some very solvable problems at the heart of this, and most of them relate to political economy. And if we intend to run this system for, human development outcomes, there are ways to do it. If we run it for political economy outcomes, then we obviously struggle.
Brilliant. I mean, we should actually dedicate some part of this conversation on getting some more job security for the poor education minister. Yeah, it's one of the bigger problems.
They come from fisheries, they go to industry.
So, Ajay, okay, so it's a very interesting sort of context that you've laid out for all the challenges, and some certainly that we didn't even know about. But somehow, obviously, you have found what we in Silicon Valley term as product market fit, right? You've been able to create this fit in communities where historically education and education efforts have failed. So what did you get right, which others did not?
Right. I mean, you heard the founders speak just a moment ago, and Atit Saab said something very interesting, which was we brought an entrepreneurial mindset to it. I think that is the atypical piece in all of this. The fact that they wanted to do something rather than just design it to the nth degree and start something. The fact that they wanted to scale as a design constraint from day one. That is also very atypical. Most people don't have an aspiration of 100 schools, let alone 1,000 schools. Right. But there were some things which they were constantly optimizing and iterating on from day one. So first of all, this was not a poor school for a poor child. And most people who try and address the issue at the bottom of the pyramid come up with shacks and shanties, right? And this was a purpose-built school, and it created a real interest from the community and from the donors, both ends of the value chain. They brought the schools to the community so that kids could walk to them. This was a core operational challenge because public transportation and safety of immobility was a big challenge and still is a big challenge 30 years later. So that was a huge solution for just getting kids into school. This was affordable but not free. So again, a somewhat entrepreneurial rather than a charity school kind of concept, just so that people have skin in the game and kids have this self-respect about coming to a TCF school, not just coming to a charity school. But especially for girls' education, right? You would think of the female teachers and the fact that we mandated almost that there'll be 100% female teachers as being the key clincher for this. But you can decide all you want, right? If you go into some of these localities, how do you get any teachers, let alone female teachers, where there has been no education? So transportation, actually, the fact that from day one, this was a key operational construct, was key to getting teachers and principals from where there was education into these neighborhoods. So a lot of small operational things, and then academics, I think, we can talk about in more detail, but really the language of instruction created a real kind of capability for us to operate in some of the most remote and impoverished communities as well. So I think a lot of things fundamentally focusing on the fact that we wanted to take a whole child approach and solve for all the logistical and economic issues which families were facing in sending their kids to school.
That will certainly resonate with all the entrepreneurs, on the call and across the Bay Area here in Silicon Valley. But interestingly, your approach is a little different from what us Silicon Valley wallas would do, right? Like we love, speed at all cost, growth at all costs, blitz scaling and all that, right? And your approach is more measured, more patient, more disciplined. What has that taught you about sort of sustainable growth?
First of all, I mean, I love my job because I straddle the spectrum between Silicon Valley wallas who think our scale is, just, really okay. And the development sector who think that 1,000, 2,000 school is just mind blowing. But I agree. I think speed was never a priority. I think if two things were priority, and really I wasn't there, to be honest. When I hear people who've been there for 15, 20, 30 years, especially the founders, two things keep resonating. One was the depth of the impact, and that was number one, the quality of education. If we're doing something, are we doing it well? And second, this is not a single generation effort. It's going to be, you're shooting an arrow into the dark where it'll land. Everybody was sure of one thing: we won't be around when it lands. So the institution must survive. And the sustainability of the institution was almost as important as the effect that you were having on the child and the community. So those two things, if they're the priority, then really, if a donor comes to you, and there have been stories of donors coming to us with massive amounts of money just to create a new thing or just to build schools. But we had to be really measured in our ability to not just build, but then sustain those schools and sustain them with a quality of education that we could ascribe our name to. I think that, how do you do that? I think a sustainability is often something that is equated, particularly in North America, with an endowment fund. We never ask, let's say, Unilever, what would happen tomorrow? You're selling soap and ice cream. What would happen tomorrow if the customers stopped coming to you? So where is the fund which will keep you in business for an indefinite time period, even if there were no customers? We never ask businesses that question, but we ask nonprofits that question because in some nonprofits that has been a nest egg that has been created over time. We believe sustainability is rooted in customer advocacy, customer satisfaction. And we have two kinds of customers. One is the child and the parent. We must be delivering value for them. And the other is the guy who's supporting us through their time, talent, and treasure. And that must also be a viable proposition. If we wake up every morning hand on heart thinking and believing that we are delivering value for both those sets of needs, then there is no reason why they will not continue, coming to our schools and supporting those schools. So sustainability is thought of differently. And again, that entrepreneurial mindset rather than, we're going to go out of business one day.
Yep. So, by the way, The Economist described TCF as one of the world's largest networks of independently run schools. So, I think you're doing okay on scale. Most Silicon Valley startups would love to be at this scale. You just achieved it in a more patient and more sustainable manner. So, no,
Right.
kudos to you guys. So on that, right? So zooming out a bit and talking of scaling and systems, right? You've created this, mashallah, incredible network of schools in, as you said, fairly tough conditions. So what leadership principles have you learned? What can our audience learn from you about building and scaling a company, a team, and leading through this complexity?
So it's interesting. The founders had a CEO from day one,
Mm-hmm.
but many of the first CEOs were military men, because the heavy lifting back then was the administrative sort of construct of the organization, and especially operating in locations where the system does not work. And that was true for that time. About 17 years ago, they switched to a more corporate leadership, and I'm one such person. But really, people before me came from Shell and BP, and really, wrote the book on how TCF should run. When we got into the boardroom, our response was, if you know how to use a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Our response to the challenges we saw were the same responses that we were operating within our kind of multinational kind of training grounds. We learned very quickly that this was very different. So here is today, for instance, if you look at TCF, it's 24,000 people in more than 1,000 communities geographically disaggregated. The average location gets visited by someone above that location, area, region, zone, or head office, roughly 3.5 times every month. So for the majority of the time, the Chaudhry on the ground is the school leader, the principal. And if she doesn't get it, or she wants to, she can take the school in any direction that she wants. You can construct an entire KPI framework, but as a manager and as a business person, every KPI can be gamed. And we've had our KPIs gamed to the hilt as well. Because you can make something as an indicator, but you'll always find a loophole. Very soon we learned that the distance itself mandated that for us, maybe even more than the people who came up with this expression, culture really does eat everything else for breakfast. But what it means here then is making the school leader and the teacher really own the mission. And so you are really beyond lip service, working for them. If I, as the CEO, walk into a school, I know, and the teacher knows, that I am answerable to her. And there is a culture of mutual accountability and challenge there. If I do live up to that standard, however, then when I leave, she is, and the principal is the owner of the mission equally. And then if they understand the mission well enough, they will steer the ship loosely, largely in the right direction. I think that has been a tough lesson for us to learn after a lot of mistakes. I think in terms of operational discipline, मैं कहता हूँ सबसे कि we pray and शुक्र करते हैं उन लोगों का जो हमसे पहले आए थे, because they made that cookie cutter. And with some evolution and fine tuning and optimization, which is a daily process, that cookie cutter still describes how we run schools. There is a unit concept, right? And that cookie cutter really, the whole organization is built around what happens when a 1 acre land is acquired. Fundraising knows what to do, supply chain knows what to do, engineering and so forth, and operations and HR. So I think that discipline and really adhering to the fact that you're going to constrain yourself as well as the donor sometimes to that construct has been key to scaling. The last thing I'll say is really the external voice. We are sometimes faulted and challenged for being humble. But the same people who say that we are too humble, then whisper to us, don't change. Because it is really important that we don't declare victory too often. We are talking about hearts and minds. Right? The theory of change is you'll take an individual and something you will do over an 11-year period will somehow organically result in households and communities changing, and that will organically result in a very long term in a wider systemic change. That's the real theory of change. So don't overpromise, don't declare victory, stay humble, even though you are one of the biggest in the world. And I think comes with that some level of authenticity when somebody comes to us with a very big check and says, I want you to do things this way. You still prioritize the student, the child, the family, the community, and stick to some things which you feel will work for them best. And over time, what that does is you get the donors you deserve and you get the supporters you deserve. Some of the people who really hung up on the way they want to do things and don't want to listen to voices from the ground probably won't support us. But the community we have built has been willing to walk the scaling journey with us with a lot of trust, but also mutual accountability. And I think that those few elements have really been the key in making this thing scale and sustain.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I mean, these are each of those, right? The culture, the acceptance, the ownership that you've given to folks, and but then again, keeping true to your North Star. These are quite powerful lessons, especially for any entrepreneur looking to manage the board and their investors, as well as have that culture with their team. But there obviously, as you almost hinted, there's some bold decisions that went into this stuff. So one of the decisions that I have been, whilst being a big supporter of TCF, being shall we say, a constructive critic of, is your decision to not teach primarily in English, right? आपने उसी वक्त चूज किया था, और ये मैं क्वेश्चन उर्दू में बोलूंगा since we're talking Urdu versus English. But आप लोगों ने you chose कि नहीं यार, the instruction, the language will have to be Urdu, right? So tell us what went into choosing Urdu versus English. What is the experience, and what good and bad has come out of it?
I find this a particularly interesting question with Nadeem here because he's literally written a book now on what
Okay.
effect that has. So I'll watch what I say. But really, I think the fact is that we are in a unique situation where this question even exists. Most countries never even thought of taking their kids into a classroom and putting them in front of a teacher and then making the teacher and the child read books and take exams in a language that none of them are familiar with. I don't think that even question is raised in most countries in the world. The reason why we raised that question is a real reality. We get it. But I think the key thing was, we cannot expect people to understand math and science, especially, or to understand history and environment and their cultural context, if we are hoping for them to read books in a language neither the teacher or the student understand and then take an exam in that language. So what happens as a result is a teacher in a typical English medium school tells Ali, a child, to get up and read the second paragraph from page 7, knowing that that second paragraph is the answer to question number 3 on page 10. And then she instructs them all to memorize that paragraph because that third question is going to come in the next year because it's not come for the last 2 years. That routine has robbed an entire country of the ability to think and connect language to thought and connect question to some internal process which comes up with a unique answer. So I think we have been very clear, and now we're really sort of doubling down deeper as we get into a greater understanding of how important the early years are. Global research on education will tell you that that's where the brain forms its self-view, and forms the core concepts of reading and literacy and numeracy. So we are actually in some provinces like Sindh actually going and making sure that the early years are in a language that they speak at the home. And that kind of transition is really smooth. But there is no taking away from the fact that English is a key requirement for not just the world, but Pakistan and success, especially economic success in Pakistan. So there's no romance in poverty. And when you talk to alumni, they'll tell you that they struggle without spoken English skills. So we teach spoken English skills, and we have always had a challenge because of the locations where we operate. Having teachers who have English proficiency in those locations is really tough. And to be honest, we need to do a lot better. So again, as we get into a new strategy kind of refresh, this is one of the things that we really want to double down on. And one of the things we have working for us now is technology. Not just traditional ed tech, but especially AI. And that whole ability to kind of leapfrog what is not possible through local teachers and local English proficiency. So I think you will see the organization double down even more on building spoken English skills, especially English as a foreign language, and understanding what it would take from a human resource as well as technology perspective to solve for that. But I don't think that necessarily means that the language of instruction, especially in the early years,
Sure.
needs to be any different. We are now looking at a language ladder which starts out with mother tongue, um, goes to national language, but really in the last secondary years, especially math and science, is even taught in English once the English skills have been developed to a point.
Yeah, so that's great. That's a great compromise. It's a very nice balance, right? Like to start with that, but then to teach from like
Yeah.
whatever, grade seventh, eighth onwards. And now it's really heartening to hear, AI and tech can really accelerate that, right? So you guys are already thinking around that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think one of the big issues has been the places where most of the heavy lifting on AI, especially, has been done are not dealing with challenges of connectivity, of power, of security. Those are real challenges, right? The place where we keep our 40 plus kind of tablets is got iron bars outside, and there are all these horrifying pictures of things being broken into. And then there's the power issue, and then there is the biggest issue is connectivity still.
Hmm.
We want to make sure that we imagine the future now and build for it. So, for instance, one of the key conversations happening at the executive team right now is, let's imagine 5 years down the road, do you not see an online school completely, and then let's work back and figure out what would it take technologically and financially to solve for that and have 100% online, a
Hmm.
connected school network.
Hmm.
Um, One of the key departures that might require from us is that we will not be able to bring the nth school online, because
Hmm.
some of our schools are just really remote. And one of the constructs in TCF has always been, if you can scale it to all the schools, do it, otherwise don't do it. But in this case, we might have a school type A and a school type B, where school type B is still a few years away from being reliably online, and we run that school a little differently. But
Hmm.
then at least 60-70% are online. And then what can AI do for teachers who are looking for coaching in their own language to particular content and pedagogical issues? What can AI do for phonics and language? What can AI and EdTech do for math and addressing key kind of competency issues at student level?
Hmm.
So we really want to, over the next 12, 18 months, build internal capability and really learn from people anywhere in the world who are doing things faster than us. There is a real growing commitment inside the organization, and frankly, from our supporters. So I don't see that being something where we kind of follow. Having said that, I want to say that we, again, that whole humility and the whole kind of authenticity bit has resulted in us not sharing a lot of what we do on technology. So today we are one of the largest labs in anywhere in the world outside of government schools. And we've run pilots on 30, 40,000 schools students at a time for EdTech and AI solutions. Even now, there are classes running in Thar where secondary science teachers are not available, and the actual online teacher is sitting in Islamabad and teaching grade 9 and 10 students how to reach learning outcomes for physics. Similarly, there is a pilot running with Khan Migo,
Mhm.
already working
Sure.
on developing lesson plans and coaching teachers in some of our schools. So those things are happening.
Great.
And one of the big things that we've scaled is this massive digital learning platform, a whole curriculum, which has now been shared with the government for grade 6, 7th, and 8th, which really reimagines digital literacy and talks about not just how to run a digital medium or device or Microsoft Office, but really a little bit of coding and computational thinking and problem solving. So
Sure.
that kind of bilingual curriculum has already been developed and rolled out. So a lot of things done, but really
Hmm.
this is a space for a lot of flux in the next few years.
Yep, brilliant. Um, I'm going to shift more towards the human stories now. Um, First, actually, we're talking about various bold decisions. Very briefly, Ziasab, tell us your bold decision of going away from, sort of nice, wood paneled, leather couched halls of Citibank and Standard Chartered and Sin Club and all that fun stuff. What made you decide to join TCF and to leave?
Yeah, this is one of the questions that really, stumps me. But the fact is, actually, we all deal with our reality in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I think for some of us who are in large organizations, um, it's not easy either. It's some of it can be described as drudgery. There's others aspects of those roles which are actually much more soul crushing and bruising than just drudgery and boredom.
Mm.
So I told myself at 40 that I would either do something that I really liked and or be quiet and reconcile myself. And we used to volunteer. My wife especially used to volunteer for TCF. So I think there was a push. Banking was really pushing me away, but really, I think the unique culture and the people at TCF, right? It's really not put on, man. It's, you meet some of these people, not just the founders, but even, the folks who run the organization, the principals, and you get a sense of real authenticity. So I think there was both a push and a pull, and every, minute of the 11 years I've been here since then has been an absolute privilege, because it's not just a day well spent in a real fulfilled sort of way, but you can see incredible sort of stories of transformation, and you feel really kind of humbled to be a part of it.
Mm. It's interesting. Outside looking in, I would think that, okay, you are here to bestow your amazing gifts to TCF, but it sounds like it's been giving you decent amounts
Totally.
of gift back.
It's a privilege and a lot of blessing for my family as well,
Hmm.
on my kids as well. I think I
Hmm.
really believe that barakat really,
Hmm.
resonates throughout my family.
Yeah. No, I
So
think
really
that's
blessed.
brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Nadeem Saab, let's get on to we hear a lot about, amazing stories of transformation through TCF and all the ripple effects. Tell us your story before and after TCF. I think the audience would love to hear that from you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I think listening to Ziasa is always a real pleasure. And when he was, describing how TCF, operates these schools, it took me back in the days when I was in the TCF schools.
Hmm.
So I grew up in Ibrahim Got. It's a Kachi Abadi, as we call in Urdu, outside of Karachi. I mean, on the outskirts of Karachi. And there was, I mean, in our Kachi Abadi, and not just our Kachi Abadi, but the close 5 to 6 Kachi Abadis, there was no school growing up. ना तो वहाँ पे सरकारी स्कूल था, because the government does not recognize these informal settlements. क्योंकि उनके बारे में कहा जाता है कि वो इनक्रोच्ड लैंड पे बनी हुई है, तो सरकार वहाँ पे सड़क भी नहीं देती, डिस्पेंसरी भी नहीं देती, स्कूल भी नहीं देती. And the low-cost private schools do not come to these places because the people living there actually do not really have, what we will call, for the lack of better term, the purchasing power. तो वो low-cost private school के पैसे भी नहीं दे सकते. So literally, there was no school growing up, and I think I was extremely lucky and privileged that TCF opened up a campus in Ibrahim Got. It was actually one of the first 10 TCF primary schools in Ibrahim Got. And that's how I started my schooling. So I was not in school before TCF, started my schooling at TCF. And it completely, changed the way I would approach life, changed the way I would, think about my ability, change the way I would, imagine a future for my family, for my neighborhood, for my mohalla, for that matter. And then, I think TCF education really prepared me, academically so well कि मैं कराची जैसे शहर में किसी अच्छी जगह पे जाके पढ़ सकूं. I went to DJ Science College for my intermediate grade 11 and 12, considered one of the good institutions in the city, and there,
Yep.
met some of the finest metric graduates. Then went to IBA. It's a business school in Karachi on a scholarship called National Talent and Program Scholarship. was selected, amongst 15,000 students across the country. I was one of the 50 who got in. So I think TCF ने academically तो मुझे बहुत अच्छे से prepare किया, but also how to plan outside of academics as well, and more importantly, I think staying very deeply connected with where I come from, with my community, with the school, with the family and the neighborhood. So yeah, that's, I think if I mean, during my school, I worked in factories and stuff. So if I take TCF out of equation in my life, I think it's hard to imagine where I would have ended. So Alhamdulillah, Allah has been very kind.
And so, but after IBA, mashallah, you also came over to my other hometown of Boston. वहाँ आपने क्या किया?
Yeah. I just thought that I should. I was with Azim Khan Sahib, your father, on AAP's advisory board for a few years.
Yeah.
And he told me you went to MIT, so I thought, I mean, I might not make there, but should rather better go to the same city. So I decided to come to. So after IBA, I worked with the provincial government for a few years, then worked with the World Bank for a couple of years. And then I decided to do my PhD. I came to University of Massachusetts in Boston in 22. So now I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate. During my PhD, I did a summer fellowship at the IMF in DC, and now sort of at the last leg of writing my dissertation.
MashaAllah, amazing. And so actually there's a question in the chat as well about kind of your dissertation, and I wanted to ask you about that too. A lot of your research is around economic mobility as stimulated by sort of educational systems, and in particular TCF, how it fits into upward economic mobility. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so my PhD dissertation is largely informed and motivated by my own life experiences. Going to TCF, and then when I was at IBA, we had initially we had a lot of struggle helping TCF graduates getting into these good undergrad programs. And there, with a couple of other friends, I started a program called TCF Alumni Development Program. And then in 2015, TCF built its first intermediate college. We got our first class in 2016. And then seeing these kids, like this has been happening since 2013. And all of these kids, I was working very closely with, then graduated colleges and now doing, working at some of the finest places in the country. I mean, from the central bank to the civil service to the corporate world, everywhere. So I really, and then a lot of people would ask us questions on कि TCF ने 71,000 बच्चों को पढ़ा दिया, उनका हुआ क्या? So that हुआ क्या had to be answered in a very systematic manner. And in fact, this was the real question that was asked by a very renowned development economics professor to me when I met him at the Kennedy School at Harvard. So I thought that really sort of motivated me that I should go study this. So what I'm doing for my dissertation is I'm looking into the kids who removed the barriers and were able to get into good undergrad programs. And then what really enabled them to get into those undergrad programs, and how did that translate into their social positioning in the society, into their in terms of unlocking economic opportunities for them, and so on and so forth. And then another set of kids who were not able to get into these top tier undergrad programs or any sort of college education for that matter. And they were from the same socioeconomic background, like वो लड़के उसी मोहल्ले में साथ खेलते थे, लड़कियां एक साथ आती जाती थी, सेम. आई मीन, आप एक ही गली में रहते हैं तो कितना ही फर्क होगा आप में, आप एक ही मस्जिद में नमाज पढ़ते हैं and all that. So what were the sort of real barriers, और वो क्या चीजें थी जिन्होंने उनके लिए यूनिवर्सिटी एजुकेशन मुमकिन नहीं बनने थी? So that's what I'm trying to study and trying to understand. And a lot of, I mean, the motivational part comes from definitely from my own journey and from the journey of my peers at TCF. But I think the intellectual motivation comes to those questions that I hear, हमारे जैसे इलाकों के बच्चे जब वो यूनिवर्सिटी एजुकेशन हासिल करते हैं तो उससे उनकी जिंदगियों पे क्या असर?
So, got it. Very interesting. So, by the way, how do you think, being a TCF student, right, has sort of shaped how you and other alumni sort of, kind of approach the challenges, right? Because आप लोग there's a different thing than, your average, sort of O levels, A level schooling system or matriculation system, your typical level there. How do you think it, sort of prepares alumni to approach challenges and opportunities differently from others?
I think the very first thing that comes to my mind is resilience. I think ke, your education, like your school, sort of give you this awareness that education is perhaps the most enabling tool that would help you get out of intergenerational poverty that you have been stuck for many generations. I think that realization, when it comes to you, I'm talking about TCF school students and eventually graduates, that sort of, that realization and how to make it happen gives them a lot of motivation to do things. And I think another thing that I see different in them, that they don't really, give up so early. So they try very hard, try to take it home, don't just leave it in between. That's another part. And the third aspect that I see differently, is sort of seeing others around them कि यार हमारे स्कूल के और बच्चे जो हैं, once I am out of that, yeah, I am able to make it at a certain point, I have a responsibility to go back and bring others to that same point again. So I think that sense of collective, progress, or that sense of, a shared prosperity for the entire community and the neighborhood is what really distinguishes TCF school students and alumni.
Well, may that sentiment spread to everybody in Pakistan. That's amazing.
That's what we are trying to do.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
अच्छा, there's some really other good questions. हमने जीशान साहब का तो एक क्वेश्चन आंसर कर दिया आपकी thesis के बारे में. There's a question from Sufia Ahmed for both Nadeem and then also for you, Zia Sahab. Okay, how do you see these TCF programs today being able to create leaders of tomorrow, right? Especially with the focus on STEM, right? And with AI, which is changing everything we see, what is your sense for both of you? And you can just take a quick minute to answer. Maybe Nadeem, aap dekhenge. How do TCA programs now
Go ahead, Nadeem.
basic education? But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I would take this. One, the TCF secondary schools, like so we have the metric system in the country. We used to be with the local boards, like the provincial boards, and now most of our secondary schools are with the federal board. And that decision was taken to improve the quality of not just education in general, but especially the science education. I think, with respect to the STEM education, almost more than 90% of our kids who do their 10th grade from TCF, they do metric science, that's what we call, because that opens more doors for them when they go to grade 11 and grade 12 and so on and so forth. That's one thing on STEM education. On the leaders for tomorrow, I think, or the future leadership, not just in those neighborhoods, but leadership at the tehsil level, at the district level, at the city level, at the provincial level, and at the national level, in organizations and places. I think when I go meet TCF school graduates, I see that happening. एक छोटे level se leke, you gradually move up. Some of our graduates, also running the general election for a councillor seat. Actively participating in politics. Some went on, built student clubs and societies jab wo colleges mein the. Some went on, became part of jo local masjid hoti hai, because that's the main institution in a village or in a kachi abadi. Be part of the masjid leadership to sort of guide and direct programs in the society. And some also, of course, joined formal careers and are alhamdulillah progressing so well. So I think there are different sort of facets to it. I think in term, and I see a lot of potential. I always say this, that TCF students might be resource poor when it comes to their financial standing, but they are not confidence poor. So they are very well targeted towards what they want to do for themselves, but for their communities and for their neighborhoods as well.
Yes, have anything to add?
Yeah. Lovely to hear Nadeem speak about these things from a first-hand experience, of course. But 2-3 things that I really want to share. First is the absolute numbers, right? So for every 100 kids which are graduating from TCF with a 10th grade education, 87 enroll in an intermediate program, and this is roughly this compares to roughly 50-55% for the national average, and then 27% actually enroll in university level tertiary programs, and that compares to 12%, which is the national average. So the 12% includes all of us, the most privileged kids as well, the kids from the middle class as well, all the kids coming from really good private schools as well. And net, this country is able to get 12% of its kids to the entrance point of university. And TCF, and with a skewed sample of really, challenged communities, if it can get to 27%, this sort of formal education funnel, and we are really unhappy with these numbers, by the way. We really think that this can be maybe 40, even 50% as far as university entrance is concerned. But we also, at the same time, have to imagine multiple phases of success. One of the things that, Nadeem यहाँ बैठा है, हमारे culture में बड़ा किसी की तारीफ करना मुंह पे बहुत ही मायूब समझा जाता है. So we don't try and do this, but I have to. He is an outlier. He's like a unicorn, right? He's not even done justice to what he has done for other kids coming out of TCF, and things that he's done on the ground and still doing, mashallah. What he has done in his community for children who's not even going to TCF schools, in terms of community action and places and spaces for them to learn and be better. But the good thing is that I see this replicating at scale. Whether it is, there's a girl called Nishat who's one of our graduates. She became our teacher, our principal. She became an area manager, and now she's a regional education manager, which is roughly 200, 250 schools.
Wow.
And these are people who are coming up the ranks in TCF. I want to talk about Ayub, right? Ayub comes from Liari, and he's an artist. And he fought the good fight to be an artist coming out of Liari and practice that as a vocation, but also he's taken over a government school in Liari. And you should see that place not just being reimagined, but remade, and the goodness that is radiating out of that place. So when we talk about, and as I took over this role back in April, May, I went all over the country and I met these young people that Nadeem is talking about, and especially the girls. Oh man, they're just world class in terms of when we, Sophia's asking about leadership. Leadership is not going to come from just knowing AI. Leadership is, no leader crosses the finish line alone. So you're not a leader if you're just, crossing the finish line as the first person. You have to think about carrying a whole group, a community, a tribe with you. And these people are now, as we think of radiating career counseling, of scaling how to get these thousands of kids, every year we take 8 to 10,000 kids out of grade 10. There are 48,000 children in kindergarten in TCF. So if you talk about scaling, that number is going to exponentially increase. And the only way for us to do it is to make leaders, or, allow for leadership to emerge from these alumni. And they're really stepping up. So I genuinely feel that, if anything, the fact that this whole space, this whole sector has to be remade, and the rules of the game are fundamentally changing, is perhaps the biggest break that our kids could have gotten. Because now the gap between privilege and our kids is even less. Those pieces of paper, those hallowed institutions from which success had to go and be won through, are not as important as they used to be.
Yeah.
So our kids have a big break right now. And yes, of course, we have to get them familiar with technology and the rules of, but frankly, neither you nor us know what the rules of tomorrow are.
Absolutely.
So if these kids are lateral thinkers, if they are resilient, if they have grit and perseverance, like Nadeem is talking about, then actually they'll have a leg up compared to people who are very good at reading the rules of an established system, but they're going into a world where the rules are fundamentally being remade and nobody knows what the new rules are going to be. So
Yeah.
I'm very, very hopeful, actually.
Very cool. Yeah. So, I mean, Folio 3, which is, our software services company, and very proud that we've, partnered with you guys on the academic achievement program that Nadeem was just talking about. Um, and, I seriously firsthand saw that exactly what both of you are talking about, right? Like the, the graduates coming back to help and take the entire community across the finish line, and the lateral thinking and all of that. So it's very interesting. Speaking of those sort of, public-private partnerships, or TCF partnership with governments and corporations and communities, anything that comes to your mind, Zia, of what surprised you, or in a nice way maybe, and maybe not in a nice way, of partnering with communities or a government or corporations?
So yeah, I think frankly, partnering has been one of the spaces that TCF, when especially when we imagine partnering with other organizations or other institutions, we have not done as well as we should have. We were so hunkered down in getting our 1,000 schools mark that we were looking for people who would be able to scale to that degree with us. And frankly, there are very few organizations, not just in Pakistan, but around the world, who would have been able to, walk that journey with us. So really, a lot of things we've had to develop and execute on our own. But the one thing where people have really carried us on their shoulders is, we are unique in the development sector in terms of how we sustain ourselves. And the way we sustain ourselves is not through raising money or finding donors, but through finding owners. I was in Europe a few years ago and sitting in a cafe in Frankfurt talking to a very small group of Pakistanis who lived there. They had been exposed to charity work for so long. They said, "Okay, when's your event and what's your target?"
Right.
And I said, "I have no event and I have no target. I'm here just to ask you, will you walk this with us?" And that model is not just a put on. If you talk to any of the people who run TCF USA, TCF Canada, TCF UK, these are people who are owners in every sense of the word, but they're not employees. And that, I think, at scale, for the $55 million we raise every year, the number of people who are employed, including me, to ask for money, maybe less than 20. And organizations of our size globally don't operate like that. So for us to find that broad community and build that broad community of support has been the biggest surprise for me as a banker. Some of these people would come to the bank and ask you, why does this checkbook cost so much? But here they would open the checkbook and
Right.
literally give you time, not just their money. The other thing, Omer, which has really surprised me, is that this has not just been Pakistanis. So I found people, it's more rare for sure, but I found people everywhere who do not share the memories or the visceral kind of heritage of growing up in Pakistan, but they really have a real inherent love for young people, for children. They believe that it is a question of fairness to give them that opportunity. And I've seen them being the same fierce advocates and believers and supporters. And I want to, say a few names Shashi, who's on the board of Skoll Foundation. Not born in Pakistan, but still, our entire Italian um, country partner, our Italian was founded by a group of Italian women who just adopted this cause for their own. And even in our staff, I want to say everyone who is a staff member at TCF is actually a volunteer because they could find something that pays better. So, people like Eric, I think Eric is on this call somewhere. Right? Like,
Yeah.
fundamentally, you come to share at a much more deeper level. The fact that, it could be somebody from another country, another culture, But really, I think that has really made me a much more hopeful person as a whole,
Yeah.
because it's not just because people are paying back. It's lovely to see that kind of level of ownership.
Yeah, no, well, this call and all the work that Eric Temple is doing, and
Yeah.
so see the entire discussion we curated. So kudos to him and all the other folks like him who see sort of us as sort of one human race and not as tribes. And in this time, I think that's a very important lesson for all of us to learn. So Sharf Saab is just sent in a little question about when he joined Standard Chartered. That's when you left, Zia, at the height of your career, which is interesting. And so, but I think Sharf should not take it personally. I don't think you left because Sharf Safar just joined. But he's asking a very good question, Kibai. How can those of us, right, Pakistani Americans, the Pakistani diaspora, how can we meaningfully contribute? So, I understand what you're saying. Come walk the walk with us. But what does that? And we're down to our like sort of last 5 minutes here. Although I think the conversation could go for much longer. But what meaningfully do you think we can do as the diaspora to contribute back to TCF?
So I don't think we should sort of diminish the role that the diaspora even plays today.
Yep.
We like in the $55 million that we raised, 22 comes just from the US.
Wow.
And overall, 60% of what sustains us comes from outside of Pakistan. When you talk about wealth being created and the way globally, giving is evolving, it is so dependent on individuals, and it is so dependent on connections and relationships. Even where you have large global foundations with very flashy veneers, inside there are human beings that you and I interact with. So the fact that we have this community, the community always asks of us this question: what can we do to be viscerally closer to the program? And this is a very valid challenge. So we are working on programs as we speak, which would allow for not just people of your age and mine, Umair, but especially our younger folks,
Next
especially
generation. Absolutely.
teenagers,
Yep.
to come back
Yep.
and really experience not just the general joy of giving, but also a little bit of the smell and the sights and the sounds and the visceral kind of context in which we
Yep.
operate and own it as their own. So I think that is definitely something we're working on, but I don't think that will ever replace the service people are doing when they get themselves, their families to, fix chairs and connect TCF staff to donors or represent and advocate for us in spaces where we are not known. I think that is always going to be a huge kind of way to keep this thing running. It is different from other causes because it takes so long. It is like gardening. And in that sense, the nature of this ongoing effort requires more of people who are supporting us, because it is ongoing effort also. But I think that is still always going to be number one. But we are working on how personally people can get more involved as well.
Very cool. Very quickly though, will TCF build an endowment or any plans to build one or no?
So I think this is kind of, I touched upon this when I was talking about how we expect endowments to be the savior for nonprofits. When we were at 80 schools, the founders were confronted with this question as well. And really mathematically, so many people more adept at these numbers here on this call than me, but mathematically in a 10% inflation environment, with an investment, with a public notion of investment where, if you go to the stock market, you'd seem to be gambling. Running an endowment fund with anything like 20% returns or 22% returns, which would effectively do both future-proof the endowment as well as pay for current operations. Running an endowment with that kind of return is just very, very difficult. And scaling the endowment to the point where it can keep up with this kind of scale, 19 years to go to 1,000 school half of that time to double that base, it's just mathematically not a very viable proposition. So we chose zakat as our endowment fund, and the fact that we must have institutional capability to not just be asking for zakat, but be eligible for it, both from a religious perspective, as in always addressing the needs at the most acute level in society, but also from a customer value proposition perspective. Are we delivering real impact for the donor and for the family, for the child? And if we continue to do that, then we believe that is much bigger answer to the sustainability question for our scale than perhaps an endowment. We do have an endowment fund, by the way, and we're growing it, but it's going to be always a small part of the overall puzzle.
Makes total sense. I think you answered most of the question my friend Faisal Zaman has asked. I think, Nadeem, more for you, that what is the evidence to show to the public that there's been actual economic mobility within the TCF graduates? If you want to quickly answer that, or should you just wait for your dissertation to come out?
No, I can just quickly answer this. I think this is true almost all of our graduates, because they at least complete the 10th grade. And their generation, like their parents, none of my parents completed high school. So that's more than their preceding generation. And I think even with that level of education, what they get in terms of employment, even in the formal factories around those, Kachi Abadis, pay more than what their parents would have been earning. So that's like sort of, in terms of intergenerational, financial earnings, that increases. And if you take it to the university level, and if they, graduate from a university, they earn 5 times, 6 times more than what their parents used to do. So I think there is a clear evidence to that, and they are experiencing that every day. So
okay. Good. So we'll end with kind of the vision and looking forward, right? So my last 2 requests from each of you. First, if we could fast forward 10 years, and inshallah, TCF has achieved much of its bold vision, right? What's the headline? What's the thing that you'd want to be seen written about this TCF movement?
Nadeem, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can speak from TCF alumni standpoint, because that's the group I represent. I think 10 years from now, the headline for me, and that's what I've been, very, very aggressively working on for the last 10 years, that, maybe 20% of TCF OPEX come from TCF alumni as their gift to the organization. So that's the headline for me. And perhaps that's the endowment that TCF has been building for the last 30 years. So.
Very nice. Zia sir.
Yeah, I'm just pausing because of what Nadeem just said. So it's a question I get a lot of times, right? Scale and impact. Education is just different, Umair. It's just if TCF was planning for the kind of impact that just Nadeem or 10 people like Nadeem are creating in their individual journeys, I don't think we could have imagined this, right? The kind of leadership, the kind of aspiration that what education unlocks is that level of agency. And I think for scale, it would be a mistake for us to flatten that into a 2-dimensional, oh, we'll create these many millions of kids who have gone through this much education. What kind of education? And what is the agent of positive change? And what will we expect of them? So to me, by all means, those outputs really matter, and we should be able to take, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of kids from, 0 to, halfway through to primary, to secondary, to higher secondary, to university and beyond. But I think the headline for me would be 1,000 communities where TCF, through their individual level kind of theory of change, taking root over a period of time, has been able to impact collaboration, cohesion, agency, those communities taking care of their own problems. We are operating in a country where governance has really repeatedly not only failing us, but abdicating its role. There's a question here about, what about the public policy standpoint? And TCF about 10 years ago really started engaging not only at the policy level, but actually doing the heavy lifting of running government schools ourselves and really playing a very active role. And we still do, and we remain committed to it. But is the intent and commitment there in the public sector also? And our job is not to wait for that intent to somehow magically appear, because the child is waiting for us.
Right.
So we will continue going to new communities, and where we are today, hoping to seed enough agents of positive change so that maybe 10 years from now, 1,000 communities can represent that at a community level, that impact of more progressive attitudes and norms, more female participation in work, more kids stepping out and taking care of the communities as a whole, not just of themselves as sovereign individuals, right?
Yeah.
I think that would be real success.
Okay, well, I have a sexier headline for you. Somebody, an anonymous attendee said, a Prime Minister of Pakistan, that's a TCFer, inshallah. I like that. You're sort of
As
going
long as
towards
that
that.
Prime Minister is doing well, I don't mind.
Look, but you will bring the character building.
Vinda leke doob jaye bas.
No, so the character building ethics, I think another
That's true, inshallah.
person has sort of identified, right? Like that you guys do invest in and all. But yeah, look, I think it would be amazing to have that, as you said, 1,000 self-reliant and prosperous communities, but then representing at national and government level. Why not? That, a headline could be that, as Nadeem is saying, 20% of, TCF is carried on the shoulder of alumni. Maybe, 20% of the government is carried on the shoulder of TCF alums as well, right? Like, I mean, you can see that impact broadly with the right sort of ethics and character, and that real sort of, I loved your sentence of, taking everybody across the finish line, not just yourself, right? So, okay, final stuff, and we're, just slightly over time now. So if each of you could shift one thing about how the world perceives education in Pakistan, we know how, various perceptions Pakistan has, engendered across the global community, but how the world perceives education in Pakistan, if you could shift one thing, what would it be? Nadeem, maybe you go first, and then Zasa.
Yeah, I think maybe that we are not ready to educate our girls, and we are anti-thinking somewhat. We live in like some medieval past. So yeah, all related things.
That makes total
Yeah,
sense.
totally agree with that. I think Pakistanis, as far as the external world is concerned, we have this real feeling within Pakistan that we are misunderstood. And when things like this happen, that kind of really confirms that theory, and that really hurts us in many, many more ways, where we are just, oh, we are alone in this, nobody gets us, boo-hoo, right? and I think that victim kind of mindset kind of just, I actually don't think a lot about how the external world views us. I wish Pakistanis would change a little bit about how they view education.
Well said.
And really make it an issue on which they press and they ask and they drive change. I don't think we should be preoccupied so deeply with the symptoms of where this all starts. Because frankly, if you're concerned about economic stagnation, if you're concerned about corruption, if you're concerned about governance issues, a plethora of issues, how do you imagine the fifth largest country in the world operating well when 70% of its kids are not learning well? There is no concept of a Pakistan which is thriving without its kids thriving. So we should stop really focusing on, the traffic is so bad, and instead focus on why. And work on how a society is really constructed over a couple of generations, and insist on some of those things. TCF was not made to make systemic change happen. We don't have the mandate and we don't have the muscle to move a country this big. But all of us do have a role to play in prioritizing education. And it's a promise we almost implicitly make with our young people when we bring them into this world. So I think that's what I would love to see.
Yeah. the change within our own selves and within our own community. Yeah, brilliant. Well, what a pleasure. Zia Saab, bahut shukriya. Nadeem, such a pleasure to talk to you again. I hope everybody enjoyed this. Thank you, TCF and Eric, for inviting me to this. And thank you, everyone who attended. Hopefully, we had lots of inspiring moments and lots of fun. Inshallah, Zia Saab,
Thank you
I'll
so
see you.
much, Umair. Really,
Thank
really,
you.
really pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes. Office. Okay.